warrior princess, a woman so powerful she refused to marry any man who could not defeat her in wrestling. A woman who rode into battle beside the great Kublai Khan, a direct descendant of Genghis Khan herself. This is not a legend. This is not a fairy tale. This is the true story of Khutulun, the Mongol princess who ruled an empire. And her story has been waiting 1,000 years for you to hear it. The wind across the Mongolian steppe does not whisper. It screams a song of endless sky and brutal freedom, a song of conquest that once echoed from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. This was the world forged by Genghis Khan, a world of horse and bow and absolute dominion, and into this world of supreme masculine power, a daughter was born to one of its most formidable leaders. Her name was Khutulun. Her father was Kaidu Khan, a grandson of Genghis himself, a man who ruled Central Asia and challenged the great Kublai Khan for control of the entire Mongol Empire from her first breath. Khutulun was not destined for a life of quiet seclusion. She was not raised to be a political pawn in a marriage alliance. She was raised with a bow in her hand and a warhorse as her closest companion. She learned to ride before she could walk. She could shoot a target at full gallop with lethal precision, and she possessed a strength that shocked the hardened warriors in her father's court. She was the favorite child, not for her beauty, which histories say was remarkable, but for her spirit, a spirit as untamed and vast as the steppes themselves, a spirit that would soon become the stuff of legend, a legend that begins not with a promise of marriage, but with a challenge. As Khutulun grew into a young woman, her fame spread like wildfire across the Silk Roads. Princes and powerful chieftains from every corner of the empire came to her father's court. They came not just to pay homage to Kaidu, but to seek the hand of his legendary daughter. These men arrived with vast herds of horses as dowry. They promised military alliances and immense wealth. They saw Khutulun as the ultimate prize, a key to securing a bloodline tied directly to Genghis Khan himself. But Khutulun would have none of it. She was a warrior, not a bargaining chip. She understood the politics of her world, but she refused to be owned by any man. So she made a declaration that would echo through history. She would marry any suitor who could prove himself her equal in a contest of wrestling. But there was a catch, a wager that made every proposal a high-stakes gamble. Any man who wished to challenge her must first wager 100 horses. The news of this challenge spread from the high mountains to the desert oases. It was a scandal, an impossibility, a thrilling spectacle. One by one, the proudest warriors of the steppe, the most arrogant princes from distant lands, they all came to test their strength against the daughter of Kaidu. They set up their camps outside her father's court. They brought their finest herds of 100 horses each, and one by one they faced Khutulun on the wrestling ground before the eyes of the entire tribe. The air would be thick with anticipation. The crowd would fall silent, and then the match would begin. These were not gentle bouts. These were brutal displays of raw power and skill, and every single time without fail Khutulun emerged victorious. She would throw her opponents to the ground with a force that stunned them. She would pin them with an effortless grace that humiliated them, and with every victory her legend grew, and so did her herd. She amassed a fortune of 10,000 horses, a symbol of her unmatched prowess and her absolute independence. She was unbeatable, not just in body but in will. Her value to her father, Kaidu Khan, went far beyond the wrestling ground. She was his most trusted confidante and his most feared military commander when Kaidu went to war to expand his territory and challenge his cousin Kublai for supremacy. Khutulun was right beside him on the battlefield. She was not a symbolic figurehead. She was a frontline combatant. Marco Polo himself wrote of her, describing how she would ride into the fiercest fighting, and like a hawk seizing a bird, she would plunge into the enemy's midst and seize a man as if he were a prisoner and carry him back to her father. This was not just bravery. This was a tactical display of terror and skill. She could break enemy lines with the force of her charge. Her presence alone was a morale booster for her own troops and a nightmare for her foes in a world where information was power. Khutulun was also her father's chief advisor. She had a keen mind for strategy and politics, often guiding Kaidu's decisions and protecting him from plots and deceptions. She was his shield in council and his sword in battle. The greatest conflict of her life was the civil war that tore the Mongol Empire apart. This was not a war against outsiders. This was a war of brother against cousin, of legacy against legacy. On one side stood Kublai Khan, who had embraced Chinese culture and established the Yuan dynasty in China. On the other side stood Kaidu Khan, who believed Kublai had abandoned the traditional nomadic ways of Genghis Khan. Khutulun stood firmly with her father in defense of the old Mongol traditions she fought in. Countless battles against Kublai's forces, her knowledge of the land and her ruthless tactics making her a pivotal figure in this decades-long struggle. Her involvement was so crucial that rumors began to swirl, dark, insidious whispers. Orchestrated by their enemies, Kublai's agents spread propaganda that the relationship between Khutulun and her father was unnatural and immoral. This was a calculated political attack, designed to undermine Kaidu's authority and tarnish the reputation of his greatest asset. These vicious rumors struck at the very heart of Khutulun's identity. They were an attempt to destroy what she held most dear, her honor and her loyalty to her family. The political pressure became immense to silence the gossip and to secure the succession of her father's empire. Khutulun was forced to make a monumental decision. She had to marry. She chose a man from among her father's followers, a man named Aptakul, while the historical records do not tell us if he was one of the suitors she defeated, or a man she selected for his loyalty. What is clear is that this marriage was on her terms. She did not surrender her independence. She famously defended her ability to continue to fight and to advise her father. The marriage was political, but it was her political choice. She proved that even when conforming to necessity, she would do so without sacrificing her own power and agency. Tragedy struck the empire with the death of her father, Kaidu Khan. His passing created a massive power vacuum and a fierce succession crisis followed. Khutulun was the obvious choice, the most experienced, the most respected, the most capable leader. She had been the co-ruler in all but name for years, but the Mongol nobility was still a patriarchy. Her brothers and other male relatives saw her as an obstacle to their own ambitions. Despite her legendary status and her immense contributions, they rallied against her. They questioned her right to rule solely because she was a woman. In a shocking turn of events, Khutulun was pushed aside. Her brother Oris was elevated to be the new Khan. Her heart must have been filled with a unique kind of fury to have proven herself time and again in war and in council, only to be denied at the final moment because of her gender. Though she was denied the ultimate title of Great Khan, Khutulun's influence did not simply vanish. Her brother and the other tribal leaders knew they could not rule without her support. She remained a powerful and influential figure within the empire, commanding the loyalty of thousands of troops and managing her vast herds of horses, which were a symbol of her wealth and independence. She continued to be a key political player, a kingmaker, if not a king herself, but the fire that had once driven her seemed to dim. The empire her father had built began to fracture and weaken without his strong leadership and without her direct control. The story goes that Khutulun died just a few years later in 1306. The circumstances are unclear, lost to time, but one can imagine a heartbreak, a spirit that could not be contained in a world that had finally managed to cage her. For centuries, the true story of Khutulun was overshadowed and distorted. In the West, she was romanticized and fictionalized, most famously in the story of Turandot, the icy princess who challenges her suitors with riddles. But the real Khutulun was far more compelling than any opera character. She was not a cruel puzzle setter. She was an athlete, a general, a politician, a woman of flesh and blood and iron will who lived by a code of strength and honor in an age that gave her none of it freely. Her story is a testament to the fact that history is not just the story of great men, but of great women whose narratives were often rewritten or forgotten by the men who came after them. So what happened to the bloodline of Khutulun, the descendants of this warrior princess and of Genghis Khan himself? The genetic legacy of Genghis Khan is one of the most startling stories in human history. A scientific study revealed that a specific bi-chromosome lineage originating in Mongolia about 1,000 years ago is present in nearly 8% of men across a vast region from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. That is roughly 16 million direct male line descendants. Today, this is a tangible biological echo of the Mongol Empire's expansion and the prolific lineage of its ruling family, while this traces the male line. The blood of Khutulun and her children would have spread throughout the aristocracy. Of Central Asia, her descendants would have been princes and warriors, carrying the combined legacy of Genghis Khan and his most powerful granddaughter in their veins. Let us think for a moment about the sheer force of will required for Khutulun to achieve what she did. She existed in the 13th century, a time when women in most parts of the world had very few rights. Yet on the Mongolian steppe there was a slightly different tradition. Women were often left in charge of the camps. When the men went to war, they managed complex logistics and resources. This provided a platform, but Khutulun took that platform and built a fortress upon it. She defied every single expectation placed upon her. She rejected the institution of marriage. Until she was ready, she dominated men in a physical contest, which was the ultimate measure of strength in her culture, and she commanded armies in an era when female commanders were almost unheard of. Her life was a continuous act of defiance. Why does the story of Khutulun matter to us? Today it matters because she is a historical figure who shatters our preconceptions about the past and about female power. She was not a queen who ruled from a secluded palace. She was a warrior who led from the front. She was not a ruler who inherited a peaceful throne. She fought for her position tooth and nail. Her story teaches us about resilience, about the courage to set your own terms in life, and about the relentless pursuit of your own destiny, even when the entire world seems arrayed against you. She is a symbol for anyone who has ever been told they cannot do something because of who they are. She is the embodiment of the phrase. Nevertheless, she persisted. If we could travel back in time to the court of Khan, what would we see? We would see a woman who moved with the unshakable confidence of someone who knew her own worth. We would see the respect and perhaps the fear in the eyes of the soldiers who followed her. We would see the long lines of horses, her winnings, stretching to the horizon, a testament to her victories. We would hear the stories not as dusty history, but as living breath. We would understand that Khutulun was not just a person, she was an idea, the idea that strength, honor, and leadership are not qualities belonging to any one gender. They are human qualities, and she possessed them in greater abundance than almost anyone of her era. The legacy of Khutulun is not just in the genes she passed on or the battles she won. It is in the power of her story, a story that refuses to be forgotten. It is a story that has survived the attempts to turn her into a fairy tale. It has survived the silence of the historical records. It has survived the smear campaigns of her political enemies, and now 700 years later, we are still talking about her. We are still captivated by the image of the princess who wrestled her suitors and won, the general who fought for her father's empire, the woman who was truly her own sovereign. This is the ultimate victory for Khutulun. Her story endures. So the next time you feel the wind on your face, imagine that it is the same wind that swept across the Mongolian steppe, a wind that once carried the sound of thundering hooves, the battle cries of warriors, and the triumphant shout of a princess who would not be tamed. Remember the name Khutulun. Remember the descendant of Genghis Khan who built her own legend not through birthright alone, but through sheer unyielding force of character, a warrior, a ruler, a legend. Her story is now yours to remember and to share. The Mongol princess who ruled an empire